clowning around. The park had always been my sanctuary, a place where I sought refuge from the daily grind of life. The lush greenery and playful laughter of children provided a soothing backdrop to my evening walks. But one night, that familiar haven transformed into a realm of unimaginable horror. The clock had struck midnight when I decided to take a leisurely stroll through the park. I walked down the dimly lit path, feeling the cool breeze rustling the leaves over my head. Everything seemed tranquil, except for the unsettling feeling of being watched. As I ventured deeper into the park, a chill snaked down my spine. The shadows were alive with shifting shapes and ominous whispers, and I quickened my pace, eager to leave the unsettling darkness behind. That's when I saw a lone figure standing beneath a flickering streetlight. Something that most people would say is straight out of a horror movie. It waited, and it just stood there, not moving. The figure was grotesque, a clown, adorned in a ragged, dirty costume that had seen better days. Its makeup was smeared, and its expression twisted in a malevolent grin. The clown's eyes, cold and hollow, were locked onto me, unblinking. It stood motionless, like a sinister person guarding the path ahead. Think about when the clown craze was a big deal, when those people used to dress up as clowns and wait for people in the dark of night and ambush them. But this one seemed more real than that. The feeling of being watched intensified as I approached the clown. Each step I took was met with a heavy, oppressive silence. No matter how close I got, he wouldn't budge an inch. My heart raced, and my instincts screamed at me to turn and run, but my body refused to comply. Its stare never wavered, its eyes locked onto mine as if it could see into the dark recesses of my soul. I tried to break the eye contact, but it was as if an invisible force held my gaze in its cruel grip. Of course, I didn't want to take my eyes off of the clown, out of nervousness that he might do something. I'm telling you, this thing was not normal. It wasn't like a person dressed in a costume. I could see a glint of something sinister in those unblinking eyes. The minutes stretched into eternity, and still, the clown never moved. It just stood there, unyielding, a silent person in a moonlit park. I wanted to scream and run, but my voice had abandoned me, and my limbs felt as heavy as stone, exactly as you'd feel in a dream. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, I managed to wrench my gaze away finally from the clown. I stumbled backwards, my heart racing, never taking my eyes off of it. Unfortunately, at one point I had to, as I'd fallen and tripped over myself with my eyes coming to the ground. When I turned back around, it was gone, as if he'd never been there before. I fled from the park, my footsteps echoing through the deserted streets. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd encountered something that nobody else had. It was like a YouTube prank that had become real, but this wasn't one I wanted to be a part of. Circus Act. The circus was always a magical place for me as a child. The vibrant colors, the dazzling acrobatics, and the whimsical acts never failed to capture my imagination. But on that night, I experienced the circus in a way that would change my fears for good. Never did I think of clowns as something so scary, until this night. The excitement was palpable at the circus, and I could hardly contain my anticipation as I took my seat in the front row. The spotlight shone brightly in the center ring, and the ringmaster's voice boomed with enthusiasm as he introduced the next act. The red curtains parted, revealing a dimly lit stage with an oversized jack-in-the-box in the middle. The audience held their breath, their collective gaze fixated on the looming, creaking toy. The music was a haunting melody that grew louder and more discordant. Suddenly, the lid of the jack-in-the-box burst open, and a figure emerged, dressed in a clown costume. When I say I'd never been scared of clowns up until this point, I'd meant it, but the mere fact that it had popped out of the box with mocking laughter had made me so scared. And it wasn't only me. The audience, initially in awe, fell into uncomfortable silence as the clown began to move. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, as if it were a marionette being controlled by some unseen puppeteer. The clown stumbled and staggered across the stage. It would make me think of the Muppets, or one of those plays where someone was holding the puppets above the stage, and you'd clearly see them from behind the box. The circus goers around me shifted in their seats, some whispering nervously to their neighbors. Some people were captivated by the performance, unable to look away from the nightmarish spectacle unfolding before us. I was certainly not one of those people, being detrimentally affected by this, but this wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the clown drew nearer to the edge of the stage. It extended its spindly arms towards me. Panic rippled through the crowd, and people began to back away, their expressions a mixture of fear and revulsion. I was left to face the clown all alone, with nobody, not even my parents, in sight. I turned my head to the side, doing the best I could as a kid, attempting to forget the figure that was right there in front of me. I wanted to leave, to escape the circus tent and this horrific clown, but my body just didn't let me. The clown's actions became more disturbing by the moment, as if it was mocking my helplessness. It danced and contorted its body in ways that defied the laws of nature. As suddenly as it had appeared, the clown retreated back to its jack-in-the-box, and the audience erupted into applause. But it was a hollow, uneasy response, driven more by relief than spectacle. I stumbled out of the circus tent as a young boy, and that was the day I realized I hated clowns. Am I dreaming? I've always had an irrational fear of clowns. It's not something I can explain, but just a deep-rooted hate that's haunted me since childhood. My friends always teased me about it, saying I was being silly, but they didn't understand the nightmares, the relentless anxiety that clowns provoked in me. The rain was lashing out against my window, and it made a great soundtrack to a dark night outside. I was alone in my dimly lit apartment, huddled underneath a blanket, trying to distract myself with a good book. But the fear gnawed at the back of my mind, whispering to me that something terrible was about to happen. The sudden power outage plunged my apartment into complete darkness, intensifying my unease. I fumbled for my phone, with my fingers trembling, and activated the flashlight. Scanning my surroundings, I tried to reassure myself that everything was okay, but then a faint noise drifted through the silence, an unmistakable squeak, like the big red clown shoes of a clown, stepping and stepping ever so closely. My heart pounded, and I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a toy left over from a childhood party. But I knew deep down I never owned anything like that, and my fear escalated as I realized that sound was getting closer. It was as if the clown was approaching, deliberately making its presence known. I carefully made my way to the hallway, flashlight trembling in my hand. As I rounded the corner, the beam of my flashlight caught something horrifying. There, at the end of the hall, a figure in a clown costume stood. It held a deflated red balloon in one hand and a wicked-looking knife in the other. The squeak of the rubber echoed in the hallway, and I could hear my own frantic heartbeat. As I turned around to run, I of course tripped on the floor like any other person would in a horror movie. I graveled at the floor and stumbled to the door, opening it up to go to my neighbor's house immediately. Now imagine in the middle of the night, waking up and going to your neighbors and telling them that there's a clown in there trying to kill you. I'd imagine that most people would take that as a joke and seriously, not normal. Thankfully, my neighbors know me, so they trusted my word and came back to check out the building with me. Knowing I should have just called the cops, I hesitated to tell them to go in there with me. But being that my neighbor is a huge 6'4" man, I figured he would just get the job done as well as any other. He came back to the place to check it out with me, along with his girlfriend. From there, we checked the whole house, and there was nothing. Not even the sound of those rubber shoes squeaking on the floor. After every crevice and nook was checked, I chalked it up to imagination. Perhaps it was just lack of sleep, or genuine fear, but when I went to bed that night with my window open, I still heard the squeak of the shoes in the distance.